My name is Miranda Foster. I'm 31 years old and I work in operations for a regional logistics company in a large metro area. My life runs on structure, not because I'm rigid, but because structure keeps things clean, predictable, contained. Every morning, I leave my apartment a little after 6. Every evening, unless something breaks out of sight, I'm home before 5. My days don't surprise me. I design them that way. Stability isn't something I hope for. It's something I build. Daniel Hayes is different. He's 29, works in public relations for a hospitality group. His schedule shifts constantly. Part office, part remote, part late-night events that blur into something less defined. Where I am structured, he's fluid. At the beginning, I thought that balance made sense. We've been together just over 3 years, living together for 2. No kids, no shared accounts, but a shared apartment, shared routines, shared plans that, on paper, looked like progress. From the outside, we worked. Inside, it was more complicated. Daniel has a presence, the kind that fills a room before he says a word. People gravitate toward him. He knows how to adjust, how to charm, how to turn attention into something that feels personal. I used to admire that. Now I realize I was the one absorbing the cost of it. The friction between us stayed manageable as long as I was around enough to balance it, to ground it. Then work changed. I took a promotion, more responsibility, longer hours. I explained everything up front, what it would mean, why it mattered, how temporary the adjustment might be. Daniel said he understood, but his version of understanding had a short expiration date. It lasted exactly until it inconvenienced him. That was around the time Sophie started coming up again, his ex-girlfriend. Same age, same city, same vague, unfinished history. He framed it casually. Old connection. Nothing serious, just catching up. I didn't panic. I asked questions, normal ones, calm ones. How often are you seeing her? What kind of conversations are you having? What boundaries are we keeping here? His response was immediate and dismissive. You're overthinking this, Miranda. And then, almost casually, like it meant nothing, you're barely home anyway. Why does it matter who I spend time with? That was the first moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to register. He had a way of doing that, turning reasonable concerns into personal flaws if they came from me. After that, the changes were subtle, but consistent. His phone started staying face down. Conversations paused when I walked into the room. His tone shifted, less informative, more defensive. He stayed out later, answered simple questions with attitude instead of clarity. And when I pressed, gently, carefully, he accused me of interrogating him. So I stopped pressing, not because I trusted him completely, but because I wanted to see what he would do, without pressure. I didn't check his phone. I didn't follow him. I paid my share of the rent, kept the apartment running, maintained the routines that made everything function. And I watched. Then one night I was putting laundry away, and I found it. A hoodie. Not mine. Not his. Oversized. Soft from wear. Faintly scented with a detergent I didn't recognize. It was folded neatly, placed in our closet like it belonged there. I stood there for a full minute, just holding it, not trying to explain it away, not reaching for a softer version of reality, just letting it land. It didn't belong to me. It didn't belong in our apartment, and it didn't get there by accident. When Daniel got home, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I set the hoodie on the kitchen counter and asked very simply, "Why is another woman's hoodie in our closet?" He didn't look guilty first. He looked annoyed. That told me everything. "You're being dramatic," he said, dropping his keys like the conversation bored him already. "It's not a big deal." I didn't move. "Then explain it." He exhaled like I was wasting his time. "Sophie stayed over once. She left it. I washed it. That's it." And then, without pause, he pivoted. You're never even here, Miranda. What difference does it make who I spend time with?" No apology. No acknowledgement. Just deflection wrapped in irritation. I asked one more question. "If she left it, why is it folded in our closet?" He shrugged. I was being nice. Then, almost as an afterthought, "You should be glad I told you the truth." That was the moment I understood something clearly. This wasn't about the hoodie. It wasn't even about Sophie. It was about control. About him deciding what was acceptable and expecting me to adjust around it quietly. I told him calmly, "I'm not comfortable with this. Something needs to change." He laughed. Actually laughed. And then said, "If you don't like it, you can leave." He leaned back like he'd just won something. Like that was the final move. What he didn't realize was that I had already stopped arguing. Not because I agreed with him, but because I had already made a decision. I went to bed that night without saying anything else. And for the first time since we started having these conversations, I wasn't trying to fix anything. The next morning, I left for work at the same time I always did. Same routine, same coffee, same quiet apartment. If Daniel noticed anything different about me, he didn't say it. Or maybe he assumed my silence meant he had won. That the argument was over because he decided it was. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A message from him. "Are you done being dramatic yet?" I looked at it for a few seconds. Then I locked my screen and went back to work. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being efficient. On my lunch break, I opened my laptop and pulled up the lease documents. Every file was exactly where I expected it to be. I keep records for a reason. The lease was in my name, only mine. When we moved in, my credit was stronger. It made the application easier, cleaner. Daniel had been added later, just as an occupant, not a tenant. That distinction mattered. Every rent payment came from my account. Every utility, electricity, water, internet set up under my name. The security deposit, the furniture, the appliances, all documented, all traceable. The couch, the bed, the television, even the kitchen equipment. I don't like ambiguity. I don't leave things undocumented. And in that moment, all of it became something else. Leverage. I didn't rush. I didn't act on emotion. I called the leasing office and explained the situation in simple, neutral terms. I need to understand my options for removing myself from the lease or transferring it. No accusations, no oversharing, just facts. They responded the same way, calm, procedural, policy-driven. By the end of the call, I knew exactly what I could do and how fast I could do it. That evening, I came home to a version of Daniel that almost made the situation feel surreal. He was in a good mood. Relaxed, chatty, like nothing had happened. Like the conversation from the night before had simply expired. He mentioned Sophie again, casually, intentionally. I ran into Sophie earlier. We might grab drinks this weekend. He glanced at me when he said it. Testing, waiting for a reaction. I didn't give him one. "Are you going to be weird about it again?" he added, smirking slightly. I looked at him. "No," I said calmly. "I have things handled." He smiled at that, like he'd just gotten confirmation that everything would stay exactly the way he wanted. "Good," he said, "because I'm not changing my life just because you're insecure." I nodded once and went about my evening. No argument, no escalation, just quiet. That night, after he fell asleep, I started packing. Not everything, just what mattered, what I paid for, what belonged to me. Clothes first, then electronics, important documents, work equipment, personal items that couldn't be replaced. I moved slowly, carefully, every sound measured, every decision deliberate. At one point, I stood in the living room and looked around. The couch I had picked out, the TV I had mounted, the small details, lamps, shelves, kitchen tools, that made the place functional. None of it felt emotional, just us accounted for. I took pictures, every room, every angle, not because I expected a fight, but because I don't leave gaps. I slept for maybe 3 hours, woke up before dawn, loaded my car in silence. By the time the sun started coming up, most of my life was already out of that apartment. I left the keys on the kitchen counter, next to the empty space where the microwave used to be. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to explain. By noon that day, I had already submitted the paperwork. Transfer of responsibility. Removal from the lease. Everything clean, documented, final. The process moved faster than most people expect. By the end of the week, it was done. Daniel didn't notice immediately. That part almost made it easier. It wasn't until the rent reminder email came through that something shifted. Except this time, it didn't come to me, only to him. That was when my phone started ringing. First a call, then another, then messages. What is this? Why did I get the lease email? Did you talk to the office without me? I let them sit, not out of spite, just because none of it required urgency anymore. When I finally responded, I kept it simple. I removed myself from the lease and transferred responsibility. You'll need to coordinate with management directly now. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No justification. The response was immediate and explosive. Well, what do you mean you removed yourself? Miranda, what the hell is wrong with you? You don't just do something like this without talking to me. The messages kept coming. Accusations layered over confusion, shifting into anger with each one. You blindsided me. This is petty. Normal people talk through problems. They don't pull legal stunts. I read them once, then replied. You told me I could leave if I didn't like how things were. I took you at your word. That didn't calm him. It escalated everything. You're trying to punish me because I have friends? This is insane. Fix this now. There it was. Not a conversation. A demand. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed, "This isn't my responsibility anymore." A pause. Then, "I can't afford this place on my own." Another message followed quickly. "Sophie can't help. She's between jobs right now." That detail landed exactly how it should have. Quiet. Confirming. Everything I needed to know, without him realizing he'd said it. I responded once more. Then you need to figure out your next steps." The next call came as a FaceTime request. I let it ring once, then declined. It came again, and again. On the fourth attempt, I answered. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted clarity. The camera opened to the apartment, or what was left of it. Daniel walked through the living room, his voice raised, sharp. "What did you do?" He turned the phone toward the empty space. "The couch is gone. Then the wall. The TV is gone." He moved quickly, almost frantically. "The bed frame. Miranda, seriously? The microwave too?" He flipped the camera back to himself. "This is insane. You took everything." I met his eyes through the screen. "Everything I paid for." His expression tightened. "You're unbelievable. You ruined my life over a hoodie." I shook my head slightly. The hoodie was just when I stopped ignoring reality. That made him angrier. "You're selfish. You're actually selfish. And heartless." I didn't respond to that. There was nothing to say. He kept talking, accusing, reframing, raising his voice like volume would shift facts. I let him finish, then said calmly, "I'm not discussing this further," and ended the call. The next message came within seconds. "I'm telling everyone what you did." I replied once. "You're free to explain whatever version you want." Then I blocked his number, messages, social media, everything. Not to punish him, but because there was nothing left to resolve. And I wasn't going to stay available for abuse disguised as conversation. The silence that followed wasn't immediate peace, but it was clean. For the first time in a long time, there was no tension waiting for me at home, because I didn't have to go back. Blocking Daniel didn't end the situation. It just removed me from the center of it. The noise didn't disappear. It just reached me differently, indirectly, filtered through other people. At first, the messages came cautiously. Friends texting like they were stepping onto unstable ground. "Hey, is everything okay between you and Daniel? I heard something about the apartment." I kept my responses simple. I set boundaries. He dismissed them. I removed myself. No elaboration. No emotional unpacking. Just facts. But Daniel's version of the story was already evolving. At first, he told people I disappeared, that I packed up overnight and left without warning. Later, the story sharpened. I had cut him off financially. I had abandoned him. Blocking him became proof, at least in his narrative, that I was cold, manipulative, unwilling to communicate. What he left out was everything that led up to it, the conversations he dismissed. The moment he laughed and told me I could leave if I didn't like it. The pattern, the buildup. He framed the outcome as sudden, because acknowledging the timeline would have required accountability. The reality was slower, more predictable, and entirely avoidable. From what I heard, he didn't handle the transition well. He ignored emails from the leasing office at first, missed deadlines, paid partial rent, and argued about extensions. Told people he had it under control. He didn't. Sophie didn't step in the way he expected. That part wasn't surprising. When things were casual, late nights, no pressure, she was consistent. When responsibility entered the equation, she wasn't. He mentioned her less after that. Eventually, not at all. Friends offered temporary solutions, couches, short stays, but no one wanted to inherit a lease or unpaid rent. Support fades quickly when it requires commitment. By the time the eviction notice came, most of his options were already gone. I found out the same way I found out everything else. A screenshot, forwarded with a message that felt half curious, half concerned. Is this real? It was. I stared at it for a moment, expected to feel something sharper. Satisfaction, maybe. Closure. What I felt instead was relief, not because he was struggling, but because I wasn't part of it anymore. I wasn't absorbing consequences for decisions I didn't make. Watching it unfold from a distance didn't feel like revenge. It felt like confirmation. Leaving had been the only realistic option. Still, the social fallout took longer to settle. People wanted context. Some wanted reassurance that I wasn't the person Daniel described. Others wanted me to soften my version, so they could stay neutral without discomfort. I didn't do that. When asked, I repeated the same thing. I set boundaries, he dismissed them, I left. Anything more felt like negotiating facts that were already clear. A few people tried to reconnect us. "She's embarrassed," one of them said, correcting themselves quickly. "He is. He's not doing great." Another said, "Maybe he's learned his lesson." I listened, then declined. Growth that only appears after consequences isn't something I build my life around. Daniel tried to reach me through other people more than once. One message framed as closure, another as needing help. Both assumed the same thing. That access to me was still available, if he asked the right way. That part stood out. Even then, it wasn't about accountability or repair. It was about stabilizing his situation, about stepping back into the role I had already walked away from. Blocking him stopped being something I justified and became something I protected. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was restorative. My days felt lighter. My thoughts weren't constantly redirected towards someone else's emotional state. I didn't have to anticipate reactions or manage tension. Distance didn't make me miss him. It clarified things. Some people don't miss you. They miss the version of you that made their life easier. A few weeks after everything, I ran into Sophie. Unexpectedly. At a bar with coworkers, she noticed me first. There was a flicker of recognition. Then something else. Discomfort. We didn't speak. Didn't need to. She looked away first. Left shortly after. That interaction told me everything I needed to know. Whatever confidence existed when things were casual didn't survive contact with consequences. I thought briefly about saying something, explaining my side, clearing the air. I didn't. Closure doesn't require participation from people who were comfortable in the confusion. What surprised me most was how little I felt after all of it. No urge to check his social media, no late-night second-guessing, no replaying conversations trying to find a different outcome. Just stillness. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like something was about to go wrong. What stayed with me after everything settled wasn't the argument, or the hoodie, or even the way it ended. It was the clarity. Distance has a way of rearranging memories, not changing them, but stripping away the justifications you use to make them easier to live with. Once the noise was gone, I started replaying things differently, not to punish myself, just to understand. There were signs long before Sophie, patterns I had labeled as manageable because they didn't disrupt things enough to force action. The way Daniel framed every disagreement, how a simple concern from me became an accusation in his version, how compromise always seemed to end with me adjusting, and him deciding whether it was enough. At the time, I told myself that was normal, that relationships required patience, that people had rough edges. What I didn't want to admit was that patience becomes something else when it only moves in one direction. I also started noticing how often I had been positioned as the stabilizer. If something went wrong, I fixed it. If he was overwhelmed, I absorbed it. If plans fell apart, I reorganized everything so he didn't feel the impact. That dynamic didn't start with Sophie. She just exposed it. A friend asked me once, not long after everything ended, "Would you do anything differently if you could go back?" I thought about it. Expected the answer to be complicated. It wasn't. I would have left earlier. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because clarity had arrived long before I acted on it. Staying taught him that dismissing me had no cost. Leaving taught me that enforcing boundaries doesn't require permission. Occasionally, updates about Daniel still reached me. Not often. And I never asked. New place. New roommate. New version of the story. The pattern didn't change. It just reset. Chaos. Then reinvention. Without accountability. After a while, I stopped listening. Not because I didn't care, but because it no longer had anything to do with me. What I did pay attention to was how quickly my body adjusted once everything was over. I hadn't realized how tense I had been living, how alert, how prepared for friction. Calm didn't feel boring. It felt earned. That realization didn't stay contained to the relationship. It moved into everything. Work conversations became clearer. Friendships simpler. I stopped negotiating basic respect anywhere. Not just with Daniel, with everyone. The breakup stopped being something that happened to me and became something I chose. That distinction mattered more than closure ever could. I didn't date for a while. Not because I was damaged, but because I wanted to reset what felt normal. I paid attention to small things. How silence felt. How it felt to walk into my own space without bracing for tension. No dread when my phone buzzed. No rehearsing conversations in my head. No calculating reactions. That became my baseline. Eventually, I met someone. Nothing intense. Nothing rushed. No shared keys. No shared lease. Just time. What stood out immediately was how little effort it took to maintain peace. Disagreements stayed contained. Boundaries didn't turn into debates. There was no need to explain basic expectations. They were understood. That contrast made everything clearer than any argument ever had. I stopped framing my past relationship as a story about betrayal and started seeing it for what it actually was. A story about alignment. Daniel didn't betray me once. He showed me who he was, consistently. I just delayed believing him, because believing him would have required disruption, and I wasn't ready for that. That delay cost time, energy, focus. Leaving returned all of it. The eviction stopped being something dramatic in my memory. It became predictable, a direct result of choices made by someone who assumed consequences were optional. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt done. There's a difference. Vindication keeps you tied to the outcome. Being done sets you free from it. The resolution didn't come in a final conversation, or a message, or some moment where everything made sense all at once. It came quietly, over time, as my life stabilized in ways that didn't require effort to maintain. The chaos didn't follow me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Eventually, Daniel stopped coming up in conversation, not because people forgot, but because there was nothing left to say. His life moved in its own direction. Mine did too, without overlap, without interference. What stayed with me was the lesson. Boundaries aren't ultimatums. They're information. They tell people how access to you works. And when someone ignores that information, the response isn't to repeat it louder. It's to remove access. For a long time, I thought being reasonable meant staying flexible. What I learned instead is that being reasonable also means knowing when flexibility turns into self-neglect. I didn't leave to punish him. I left to correct myself. Looking back, the hoodie was never the problem. It was just the moment I stopped negotiating with reality. Everything after that was just follow-through. I don't regret how it ended. I regret how long I stayed once I knew it should. That's the part I own. If there's anything worth taking from this, it's simple. Pay attention to how often you're asked to understand, while your own needs are minimized. Pay attention to how often peace depends on your silence. That's not compromise. That's conditioning. Walking away didn't make me cold. It made me honest. And honesty, especially with yourself, has a way of cleaning things up faster than any argument ever could.